Hook me up. All right, we'll wait for Luana. While we're waiting for people to wander in, Nancy Hobbs was asking me what are the dimensions of the Mina weight behind me. I don't know, it's 1.25 pounds, so I don't know. It's probably basalt is the material, so I don't know. It's probably about like that. She asked, what's the writing? It's a Syro-Babylonian writing, which is called, the language is Akkadian. Assyrian, Babylon spoke the same language, Akkadian, as opposed to actually the Chaldeans spoke Aramaic, and the Persians adopted Aramaic as their main language, their diplomatic language. But this is Akkadian, and I did take several years of this, and in fact, one of my books that is still in print for like 30 years is a handbook in this. But I don't remember how to read this stuff. I could probably come up with a few of the signs. It's syllabic syllables, you know, so there are about 500-ish, give or take, 500 to 600 signs. In other words, that's all the 1, 2, and 3 letter syllables that they could come up with in the course of a couple of thousand years. They could come up with all these syllable combinations to make words. So I was going to say, I really don't have time to do this, but I will tell an embarrassing story on myself. Should I? Kurt would love me to embarrass myself. Okay. I was with a TA of mine. I was going to go to Africa with him and teach, and then we were going to go to East Germany after that and teach. And before we did any of that, we had a layover of 10 or 15 hours in London. So I said, let's go to the British Museum, because I've never been able to go to the British Museum without spending the entire time in the British. I never have seen like the Gutenberg Bible or any of the wonderful stuff they have. I only ever go to the Egyptian and the Assyrian exhibit. So they had the Assyrian exhibit at that time, part of it down in the flight of stairs down in the basement. And so I took him downstairs, and there was a room, and it was a replica of Sennacherib's, King Sennacherib of Assyria. He shows up in the Old Testament several times. A replica of his palace. He was so proud of the battle that he won against Lachish in Judah that he made the whole room, including all the walls and either the ceiling or the floor, were covered in this writing, and then relief sculptures, right? Wall carvings to show what the Akkadian language was talking about, which is his brilliant siege of Lachish and the destruction of Lachish, et cetera, et cetera. And I had translated that at one time, but it had been many, many years before. And so, you know, he did what Nancy did. Can you read that? And I thought, well, I don't, you know, let me look. And I looked at it, and I thought, I can make out a few signs. I mean, there's 600 signs, for crying out loud. I mean, I don't store that in my brain readily. And so I was hemming and hawing and saying, you know, oh, give me a second and I'll do it. And I heard this voice behind me. There's a moral to this, which fits into the moral of the story of chapter 5, which is, if you're inclined to puff yourself up and be arrogant, don't do it, because the world's leading expert will be right behind you when you do that. It's built into the fabric of the universe. And there will be payback for your arrogance, for your arrogant presumption, right? So I heard this voice behind me saying, well, I can translate that if you'd like. And I said, no, my good man, I can do it. Just give me a second here. And he said, no, seriously, I can translate it. No, I can get there. And then he rips out this beautiful flowing tree. He said, I, King Sennacherib of Assyria, mighty king of the four quarters, king of the universe, in my third campaign against Judah, I besieged, I devastated, I annihilated the city of Lachish of Judah. And he goes on and on. I turn around and look at him and say, who are you? And I used several of his books before. One of the world's leading experts in the Akkadian language was standing right behind me. And my TA was he couldn't contain himself. He was laughing so hard. And then before I could get back to the States, the story was everywhere. Ship has embarrassed himself publicly in front of one of the great leading world experts in the Assyro-Babylonian language. So there you go. This has actually been a trope in some movies before. I don't know if you ever saw Annie Hall, a silly movie from 30, 40 years ago. Woody Allen movie, where somebody is saying something about which he knew nothing. And so Woody Allen brought out, from the wings, he brings out the world's leading expert to tell the guy standing in line to go in to see a movie how wrong he was, about that. So there will be payback for your arrogance. So, so much for that. Verses 13 through 16, this is Belshazzar's feast. I want to finish chapter 5 and go into chapter 6. Belshazzar, who is the son of Nabonidus and the grandson of the great-grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, we think. Nabonidus says that he's part of the family, but there is a real question about whether he usurped the throne, and we're not certain exactly what happened. There could be a relationship, and there doesn't have to be. Son of just means close affiliation with, very often in the Old Testament. So we're not certain. But he decided, turns out to be the night of the Persian attack on Babylon. He decides that he's going to throw a big drinking party for his wives and concubines and nobles. And when they're in their cups, and they're probably already drunk, they decide to bring out the vessels of gold from the temple in Jerusalem and to drink wine from them and to glorify, the text says, the gods of gold and silver and iron and bronze and wood and stone. So they do, and then this hand appears, and we're not certain whether we're told Belshazzar saw it. He saw the hand. We're not told that anybody else saw it, so we're not certain that anyone else saw the hand but Belshazzar, and Belshazzar loses it completely, and you can look carefully at the text to see maybe what that means. And he then sends for all the wise men in the country to come and try to read the text. Apparently they have trouble, they can't read the text. And in fact, it's really not very easy for us to read it either. It appears to be Aramaic, maybe, we think it's Aramaic, but with some twists, and also the meaning is not immediately obvious. To them, it wasn't obvious at all, and they couldn't even read it, apparently. And to us, the interpretation is not immediately obvious, and scholars have been divided about the meaning forever. So if you find it opaque, you're in good company. So he doesn't know what to do. The diviners are perplexed, and so Queen Mother comes. We think the Queen Mother, not one of the wives, comes and says, there's this guy named Daniel, this old guy. He would have been probably in his late 80s or older by this time. And She said, during your predecessor's reigns, he was, in him is the spirit of the holy gods. You know, he's got this ability to read things and to interpret, and so bring him in. So he does, and we're beginning in verse 13 through 16. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, "You are that Daniel who is one of the children of exile of Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah. And I have heard concerning you that the spirit of the gods is in you, and illumination, insight, and exceptional wisdom are found in you. And now the wise men, the conjurers, were brought in before me to read this writing and to make known to me its interpretation. But they were not able to declare the interpretation to the king. I've heard about you that you are able to provide interpretations and the text literally says this in Aramaic, loosen knots." I know that you can loosen, and we have an idiom like that in English, right? That's a knotty problem, right? We say sometimes, something like that, right? This is a really knotty situation, not N-A-U-G-H-T-Y, but the K-N-O-T-T-Y. So he could loosen knots or solve problems. Now, if you are able to read the writing and to make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple, with a chain of gold upon your neck, and you shall rule as third in the kingdom. So, similar situation to chapters 2 and 4, where the conjurers, diviners, Chaldeans, magicians, blah, 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 are all brought in. Of course, they're completely inept, completely unable to make any kind of interpretation. But in this case, he's not required to also tell, that there's writing and to conjure up even what the writing is. The writing is there. And so very similar situation. Daniel is in every case brought in belatedly after the magicians are unable to interpret anything. And the king offers the same rewards to him that he had made to the magicians. So verses 17 through 23, I'm going to try to race through this so I can do the bulk of chapter 6. Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king, and its interpretation I will make known to him. You, O king, the Most High God gave the kingdom and greatness and honor and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. And because of the greatness which he gave to him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whoever he willed, he killed." This is a guy with absolute power. "Whoever he willed, he let live. Whoever he willed, he exalted, and whoever he willed, he humbled. But when his heart was exalted and his spirit became hard so as to act proudly, he was brought down from the throne of his kingdom, and honor was taken away from him. And from people he was driven away, and his heart became like the wild beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him grass like the bulls, and his body was drenched from the dew of the heavens. Until he knew that God Most High was the ruler over the kingdom of men, and he elevates over it whom he wishes. And you, O Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all of this. But you have exalted yourself above the Lord of the heavens, and the vessels of his house they brought before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine with them, and you praised the gods of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, who do not see and do not hear and do not know anything. But you did not honor all your ways to the God in whose hand is your breath." So kind of a cautionary tale about arrogance and arrogant presumption. And I suppose on a national level this would obtain, and on a personal level this would obtain, Arrogance is never appropriate. What does Paul say? You don't know. If any man thinks he knows something, he knows nothing compared to what he ought to know. So all of us are ignorant, and all of us are weak, humble vessels that God may exalt if he wishes. And so he can also bring those down who walk in arrogant pride. So Daniel rehearses a bit of history with Belshazzar. He says, let me tell you a story. It's about your predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar. And to us, it's recent history. It's the previous chapter where Nebuchadnezzar, although he was warned by Daniel to amend his ways, lest he be driven from people and given the heart of a beast. But it didn't take with him. And so this is a cautionary tale told to Belshazzar about, actually it's not a cautionary tale because it's too late for Belshazzar. It wasn't apparently too late for Nebuchadnezzar, but it is for Belshazzar. His 7-year banishment as a wild beast from society, living outdoors, eating grass, etc. Belshazzar is culpable because he knew these things, but he himself acted arrogantly and presumptuously, and humbling or madness are not an option in this case because he has violated objects set apart holy to the Lord and trivialized them and used them in the worship of idols. And so misusing holy vessels unintentionally is in, I think it's chapter 5 of Leviticus, where one can offer the guilt offering because unintentionally violating holy space or holy objects. You're walking by the side of the tabernacle, let's say, out in the wilderness, and you trip over a tent peg. You didn't mean to do it. And the whole tabernacle falls down, and all the priests run out and go, you caught red-handed. I didn't mean to. Yes, we know. We'll do the guilt offering for you. That's unintentional violation of holy objects. Intentionally doing this brings upon himself judgment, and the judgment is death by the Persians. Verses 24 through 28, Daniel reads and interprets the writing. From before him, he sent the palm of a hand, and it inscribed this writing. And this is the writing which it inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Pharsin. And this is its interpretation. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and has ended it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Paris, your kingdom has been divided and has been given to the Medes and the Persians. Okay, sounds pretty straightforward, except it isn't. Are these verbs or nouns or a mix? Tekel is pretty much a noun, but the others could be verbs or they could be nouns. Either way, they're sort of in Aramaic. Pharsin is a plural, Paris is a singular, and that's why the interpretation, he says Paris instead of Pharsin. And if they're nouns, then they could be every one of these weights. If they're verbs, then they are verbs from which the noun weights are taken. And I hope that makes some kind of sense. The meaning of the words is not as obvious as it may first seem. Mene looks to be from Hebrew and Aramaic verb mane, to count or number. This interpretation understands the word as a verb. The other possibility is that a word is from the Hebrew or Aramaic mina, which is a noun, a measure of weight equals 60 shekels and 1/60th of a talent. A talent is a lot. A mina is a heavy little weight, 1.25 pounds, but shekels are much, much smaller. And the shekel, by the way, used to be the kind of unit, the basic unit of their economy in antiquity, and it still is today. In Israel, the shekel is the unit of currency. So this is a mina weight with Akkadian writing on it. Tekel in Aramaic, shekel in Hebrew, it's the same word, equals plus or minus-ish 11 grams. And so that's a shekel weight. That's a little symbol for a shekel weight that's been carved in the stone. And next to it is a coin, which is, a modern Hebrew, a 2 shekel piece, which says shekel on it below that number 2. So you get sort of a sense of the dimensions of it, fairly small. Balances, this is from Egypt, balances, 2nd millennium Greek balances, shekel weight at the top, half shekel weights right below that, quarter shekel weight off to the left. These are all agate quartz, varieties of quartz, all of these weights. So they had a complex system of weights and measures. They had dry measures, they had liquid measures, just like we do, and they had ways of holding merchants accountable, right, in antiquity, because it was a problem, and I guess it still is, a problem in the modern day as well as in antiquity. All right, let's back up. The half shekel is important for us down below because that may be what the paris, or plural farson, which is 2 half shekels. Now, the second word is tekel, literally weighed, if it's a verb. This is the same word as the Hebrew shekel, unit of weight. So this word could mean either weighed, passive, taken as a verb, or as a noun, a unit of weight like mina, only it's much smaller than the mina. The last word is parson. It can also have 2 or 3 meanings. First, from the verb paras, to divide, so something like divided. Second, it could be the plural of the unit of weight paris, which equals half of a shekel. And so I've got a picture there of a couple of agate weights, half a shekel. The last possibility is that it also sounds like the word, the noun, paras, Persian. My theory is that all of these words are multivalent, that they're all, could be verbs, they could be nouns. I think they're all plays on words that made it a little more difficult for the magicians and conjurers to understand, if they could even read the writing at all, difficult for them. First thing, keep in mind, diviners and magicians were not able to either read or interpret the words apparently, suggesting the writing may not have been in Aramaic, the language of the Babylonian Empire. John Walton, an evangelical scholar, says the writing was Aramaic but spelled with Akkadian cuneiform. I don't know how they wouldn't necessarily have been able to read Akkadian syllable writing because Aramaic used the alphabet, just like Hebrew. So, don't know, I don't know why. He can't substantiate that theory, but it's a theory, it's possible. The second thing to keep in mind is that these words also appear to be nouns, but Daniel interprets them like verbs. If they're all nouns, he still interprets them like verbs. Hence, Meneh, the mina or number, has been numbered. Tekel, the shekel weight, has been weighed, and there is an imbalance in the scales. Now, in the first case, I know this is ridiculously technical, I'm sorry. In the same way that we can say it's time for a reckoning, or his days are numbered, right? And who knows, maybe even in English we get that phrase from this text, maybe, I don't know. But in the same way, his days are numbered. If there's this cosmic scale, he's been put in the cosmic scale. And this particular picture is interesting. This is from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where the god Anubis, the god of the dead, weighs the heart on the left scale there. Left? Yes, left scale there is a human heart. And then there's a feather on the other side. And if this thing doesn't balance, then the dearly departed does not get to go to the Elysian fields and, have a blissful afterlife. And so this is Anubis making judgment for the dead. And so that is an ancient understanding, and we have many, many, many scales from antiquity that have been found. And he's been weighed, and he weighs a whole lot more than a feather. There's an imbalance in the scales. They don't balance out. And then finally, the Paris or Farson, which is interesting because it's plural, which seems to be 2 half shekels. And so you go from, if they're nouns, you go from the mina weight, which is 60 shekels, to the shekel, to the 2 half shekels, which is a division, right? The kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And so I think it's play on words using both active verbal sense and a noun sense for every one of these, for what it's worth. And I didn't give you all the details on that. If the details matter to you, then you can come and I'll give you my notes. They grow progressively smaller from the mina, if this is correct, 1/60th of a talent to the tekel, 1/60th of a mina to the parson, 2 half shekels. This structure may itself be indicative of the diminishment and the division, the final division of the kingdom. Maybe. It's intriguing. I was not at all convinced by this, but my mentor, one of my mentors, who's also been a lifelong friend of mine, he's spiritually standing behind me, right, correcting what I do. And this is his theory, and by the time I was done reading his commentary, I thought, okay, I can't come up with a better notion, except I would add to it. They seem to be nouns, but Daniel interprets them as verbs, so I think built into the text is both. You've got both the noun sense and the verb sense built in. Okay, I promise you that's as technical as it will get. The book of Daniel is not only apocalyptic literature, it is also wisdom, a wisdom writing. It's a book of wisdom. Why? Daniel's a sage. Daniel smokes the magicians, conjurers, diviners, etc., because they're not anywhere near as capable as he is in loosening knots. Okay? He can loosen knots, and this one's a knotty one. Okay? It's been difficult forever, and I doubt that I've answered all the questions or problems to it, but it makes some sense to me. So it's a wisdom book. Visions, dreams, and riddles abound in the book. This is one of them. This is a sort of a visible, a vision that is cast on the wall of the palace. The most accomplished scholars are stumped by the hand in its writing, but Daniel, the quintessential sage, is able to both read and interpret the words easily. It ought not to surprise us that the book is replete with difficult riddles and symbolic dreams and visions. If it were simple and straightforward, they wouldn't call it wisdom literature. And I caution you, as Charlie does a sermon series on Proverbs, Proverbs is sort of the quintessential book of wisdom. 2 kinds of literature in it. There's the sentence proverb, very short, very brief, very cryptic, invites us to compare both halves of each sentence proverb. How is it? I can only ever think of the ones about contentious women. I don't know why that is. The only ones that come to my mind. How is it that it's better to live in a corner of the rooftop than in the house with a contentious woman? What is a contentious woman like? What is it like to live on the rooftop? Why is one better than the other, right? It invites us to ponder that. The other kind of literature in it is extensive exhortations or admonitions that are the opposite of the sentence proverb. They keep saying the same thing over and over and over and over because the student is dense, okay? And it needs to be pounded in. So you've got those two kinds of literature. So pay attention when Charlie preaches, because wisdom literature is never obvious. Jesus' parables are a kind of wisdom literature as well, and they invite reflection. They're not immediately obvious what the exact meaning is and what the exact application should be. Finally, an attempt at a more straightforward interpretation. You've probably been waiting for this. The days of Belshazzar's kingdom are numbered or reckoned. I reckon his days are numbered, right? The end is in sight. The weight of Belshazzar's kingdom has been put in the scales, but the scales do not balance. In this case, he owes his life. It is time for him to pay up. The half shekels symbolize the complete division of the kingdom between the Medes and the Persians. There is always an accounting for arrogant presumption and blasphemy. God will not be mocked or sidelined or trivialized by human powers. And I suppose that is true whether it's in antiquity or today. Cautionary tale for arrogance in all forms, at all levels of government and all levels of society. Then Belshazzar commanded, they clothed Daniel in purple, and a chain of gold was placed on his neck, and they proclaimed concerning him that he would become the third ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar the Chaldean king was killed. That's interesting. Now, your English, if you flip over to the notes I just passed out, you will see that in English, many, not all, but many English translations include verse 531, which is 6:1 in the Hebrew. And that is, Darius the Mede received the kingdom when he was about 62 years old. So you've got a regime change, complete regime change with this. Irony. Daniel turns down any kind of reward. He gets rewarded anyway and gets weighed down, gets positioned, right? We don't know whether that position carries over. Maybe it does. Retribution is swift. That very night, he and his kingdom were ended. The scales were balanced. His kingdom was divided. That night, the Persians under General Gobryas, who was a Babylonian turncoat, maybe he was a Mede, after diverting the waters of the Euphrates around the city of Babylon. This we get from Greek historians, by the way, and other sources. He diverted the waters, Gobryas and King Cyrus of Persia diverted the waters of the Euphrates. Babylon was built on both sides of the Euphrates with a big wall around, like 40 feet thick. So I've heard it said that from these historians that you could have 2 or 3 chariots side by side go down on top of the wall. It was that thick. And so diverted the waters, and they walked in under the walls on dry ground with their weapons packed away. They did not even have to fight, but they did take out Belshazzar. Only 4 kings are named in the book, and I think that's important for understanding the layout of chapters 1 through 6. There's only Nebuchadnezzar, the beginning of the Babylonian Empire, and Belshazzar, the end. And then you have a Median king, Darius the Mede, and then you have Cyrus mentioned. That's it. Those are the only 4 kings mentioned. I think the interpretation of chapters 1 through 6 need to fit within that box of those kings. When we get to the visions, chapter 7 and following, it's a very different thing, and I'm going to hold off comment until next week on that. All right, so turn to chapter 6. By the way, according to some people, this might be a head sculpture of General Gobryas, who may or may not be Darius the Mede, because Cyrus installed him as the ruler of Babylon immediately upon taking the kingdom. If it's not him, Siao, my mentor, thinks it is him. Don't know. There have been a lot of theories because we don't know. King Darius, there were at least 3 Dariuses in the history of the Persian Empire. None of them was a Mede. It may be that Gobryas was a Mede. It may be that he had adopted the name Darius. Otherwise, I don't have a theory for you. That's it, the only one I've got. It's the only place Darius the Mede is explicitly mentioned is here in this text. And this is a carving and then an artist representation of King Cyrus of Persia, the supreme leader of the greatest empire the world had known up to that point, and one of the great empires of world history was the Persian Empire. All right, chapter 6, here's maybe Darius the Mede. All right, verses 1 through 3 in the English and 2 through 4 in the Hebrew for what it's worth. The chapter divisions, by the way, you know this, right? The verse divisions came about in like the 13th or 14th century AD, and the chapter divisions were somewhat earlier than that, but not a lot earlier. So it used to be that these were just a continuous text. And so the divisions, even among English Bibles to this day, you've got some variation on especially verses, but sometimes where chapters begin and end. Verses 1 through 3. It was good for Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps. And we talked about this last time. A satrap is a Persian word for governor, provincial governor. To be over all the kingdom, and over them were 3, and your translations may say 3 presidents or 3 officials or 3 premiers. I've adopted the translation premier. There's the emperor, and then you've got 3 premiers, and then you have 120 satraps, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps gave an account that the king might not suffer loss. Isn't that interesting? So the king will not suffer loss. What does that mean? Hold the 120 governors accountable so they don't rip him off, I suppose. And the Persians had an elaborate spy network throughout their history. So the spies would report to the king to make sure that, Governor Abbott of Laodicea turned over all the correct taxes to the crown, right? And so everybody was always looking over their back and it invited conspiracy, and sure there was lots of conspiracy and lots of graft. Then this Daniel distinguished himself over the premiers and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king was planning to set him over all the kingdom. So he was one of 3. Remember in the previous chapter, Belshazzar said, whoever can read and interpret this writing, I will put a chain of gold around his neck and make him 3rd in the kingdom, and whatever else he said. And so he's a thirdling. Okay, he's a thirdling, which is this premier or president. But he's not greater than the other presidents or premiers, but the king is intending to place him directly below himself over the other premiers and satraps. So I think that's important for understanding the passage. Persian Empire is very famous for its organization. Okay? Here's a map that and I can't come up with 120. In Esther, there's 127 satraps. In Greek sources, there's about, I think, 27. And I can come up with about 27 based on this map. It may be that what's alluded here, you'll see that there's these provinces, These are major provinces. But then you have some that have other little names in them where it may be sub-province or divisions of a province into smaller sections. And it may be that that's how we come up with 120 or 127, okay, in the text of Scripture. They created a major road system as well. Let's see if I got that. Yeah, here we go. Persian Royal Road between, looks like on this map, between Sardis and Susa, which was one of the two capitals of the Persian Empire. They initiated the original Pony Express, by the way, what you won't learn in this class, right? The original Pony Express. Where do you think the U.S. Postal, what is the motto of the U.S. Postal System? Neither rain, nor sleet, nor snow, nor dark of night, right, will keep us from our appointed rounds or whatever it is to deliver the mail, right? That the U.S. Postal Service always delivers the mail, right? Where do you suppose they got that? That's inscribed, by the way, at the Manhattan Central Post Office to this day, that inscription. It is from Persian, because that was the Persian motto of the Pony Express system for delivering the mail. And they had stations all along this very long road where these pony riders would deliver the mail. Anyway, I thought you'd find that trivia. Now you're exhorted and admonished with a bit of ancient trivia. Persians were known to be quite paranoid. Daniel was one of 3 premiers or presidents. The Persian Empire was notable not only for its intricate political organization, but also for its system of accountability. The 3 premiers were there to ensure that the king did not suffer, and the text literally says, grief, annoyance, or damage. King does not want to be annoyed, right? And if you steal from him, that is a major cause of annoyance or disturbance. One way the king might suffer loss was at the hands of the very satraps he had appointed. So he appoints these 3 premiers, says, you guys are over these guys, watch them, make sure that they render a correct accounting. Persian kings were quite paranoid and had an extensive spy network. I've already mentioned that. Daniel once again distinguishes himself by being wiser and more capable than all the other satraps. It is likely, once again, that the other satraps were jealous of Daniel's favor. We see this repeatedly in these chapters, that the other officials are jealous of the prerogatives of Daniel or the 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and then come up with conspiracy to try to take them out. The king was contemplating making Daniel the head over all the premiers and satraps. And it's only then that we get in verses 4 through 9 what they intend to do, which is trap Daniel with being guilty of sedition. We're not certain who Darius the Mede is. I've mentioned that briefly. There are at least 3 other Dariuses which followed Cyrus. They didn't precede him, but these were Persian. Also, this Darius the Mede preceded Cyrus. The most likely candidate for Darius the Mede is Cyrus's general Gobryas, who after the fall of Babylon to the Medo-Persian army was given the rule for a time over the province of Babylon. And we don't have a better candidate for who this cat may be. 4 through 9. Then the officials and the satraps were looking to find an accusation to bring against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they were not able to find any accusation or fault. No error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we will not find any accusation to bring against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. In other words, we'll trip him up on his own religion. It's the only way that we'll be able to bring accusation against him. Then the officials and satraps came thronging to the king, and I love that. No translation that I've read says this, but that's literally what it means. They throng. It's like a cattle stampede. All these, 120-something officials come to the king and say, "Oh, king, we've made a decision, and here's an edict we want you to sign." Okay, that's the gist of it. O King Darius, live forever. All the officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors have taken counsel together that the king should establish an edict that anyone who makes a petition from any god or man for 30 days, except from you, O king, shall be cast into the pit of lions. Now, O king, establish the edict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. In other words, once the king, and this is also in the book of Esther, once the king has made an edict, that's it. There is no retracting the edict. The edict is law, and it's there forever. Kind of like some of the laws on the books that are still in effect in Texas. There's one that just tickles me. I've heard it's still on the books that it's against the law to put wire cutters in the trunk of your car, to hide wire cutters in your car. Why is that? What? Yeah, range wars. This is a really old, and I've heard that in Boulder, Colorado, or one of those cities in Colorado, it's still on the books that it's illegal to spit on the wooden sidewalks. Okay. Once laws are on the books, they're really hard to retract, right? Well, the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked, it's permanent, right? The only way to get around it is create another edict, okay? Therefore, King Darius signed the document and the edict. Okay, sounds good. That anybody making a petition from a god or man for 30 days, except for the king, will be cast into a lion's pit. Okay, just tell people don't make petitions for anyone except the king. But as was the case with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that refused to bow down before this massive 100-foot, whatever it was, idol, Daniel's colleagues in the government looked to find a way to bring him down. Has likely to do with what we're told in verse 3. The king was looking to place him over the kingdom. One is also reminded of Haman's plot to destroy Mordecai the Jew by eradicating all the Jews. He went to King Ahasuerus and informed him of a seditious group called the Jews who were insurrectionists and bringing disturbances in the kingdom. It was not to the king's interest to keep them alive. The king therefore signed an edict to eradicate the Jews. They rolled dice. That's where we get the Feast of Purim, by the way, dice, the Feast of Dice. They rolled these dice and to determine what month will we annihilate the Jews. Well, fortunately for the Jews, it was in 11 months, okay? Because the 11s came up, right? Okay, we got to wait 11 months to eradicate the Jews. So, and that's part of the plot of the book and how it gets, how the plot unfolds and the accusers get the tables turned on them. The satraps are characterized as thronging. This term means to enter in as a crowd, to hasten to someone or cause a disturbance. They're doing the very thing that they were charged not to do, which is bring annoyance, disturbance, or damage to the king. Now, they're guilty of that very thing. Like a stampede of animals coming to the king. Note that Daniel's fellow premiers are a part of this group charged with keeping the government accountable so the king would suffer no disturbance, damage, or harm. The satraps and premiers knew that Daniel was untouchable unless they could find something related to Daniel's religion. Apparently, they knew that Daniel prayed 3 times a day to his God, so they had the king sign an edict that no one make a petition to anybody except the king for 30 days on pain of being thrown into a pit. The word is a goph. It's literally a pit. Lion's den, a den of lions is where lions kind of sleep and they hang out together, right? So I prefer pit. A hole that he gets thrown in. There are lions in there, and they can close the hole up with a stone, which is what they do. When Daniel knew, and this is important, when Daniel knew the document had been signed, I mean, he's one of the chief premiers in the kingdom. Once he knew it was signed, he went home, and what did he do? What he always did. Didn't change his behavior. He knew the document had been signed. He goes home, goes up to his roof chamber. Now, I once thought this is a public display, flaunting, right? Look at me, folks, I'm praying, flaunting this law. I don't think so. Why would he have to go on the roof to do that? And he opens up the roof chamber windows facing Jerusalem, and he does what 1 Kings 8, when in Solomon's temple dedication prayer, says that people should do if they ever are sent into exile, and that is pray towards Jerusalem, towards this house, wherein God's name is installed, what his holy presence there, and pray towards Jerusalem, and God will hear from heaven, right? Well, that's what he does. He's a faithful Jew, and so his behavior doesn't alter one iota just because the laws have changed. I think there's something for us there as well. 3 times a day he knelt upon his knees and prayed and gave thanks before his God, because that is what he had done previously. That's what the text says. Then these men came thronging, once again they're thronging to the king, and found Daniel making petition and pleas before his God. Then they drew near and said to the king concerning the edict, O king, did you not sign an edict that anyone who makes a petition from any human or God for 30 days, except for you, O king, shall be cast into the lion's pit? Didn't you make a law that no one can do this on pain of death? The king said, the word is certain, according to the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles of Judah, has no regard for the decree of the king or the edict which you signed, but 3 times a day he makes his petition. Then the king, when he heard the word, became greatly distressed concerning the man, and set his mind to deliver him, and until the setting of the sun he exerted himself to save him. But guess what? The law of the Medes and Persians cannot be revoked, and so the king is in a bind. His favorite is Daniel, we already know this, but he can't really save Daniel. Then these men thronged to the king again. They stampeded again into the court and said to the king, Know, O king, warning him, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that any edict or statute that the king establishes cannot be changed. So you're going to have to throw this man in the pit. Daniel is fully aware of the edict. He does his custom. He makes his devotions. They're waiting for him. They come thronging to Daniel, and they see him engaged in prayer. Well, a lot of things happen in prayer. It's not just petition, right? But petition is a part of prayer to God, right? And so they bring the accusation to the king. Nothing is said of Daniel violating publicly the king's edict. We're only told that he continued to do his devotions as he had previously done. His prayer posture is interesting. Here he's on his knees, which may be where we get the practice of kneeling in prayer sometimes, right? But there are other postures of prayer in Scripture as well. There's standing and lifting the hands to heaven, for example. There are several prayer postures. There's not one that's, we tend to bow our heads. That's our posture. It's different in other cultures, and you get a variety of postures in the Old Testament. The satraps who had arranged the setup went to the king and reminded him of his edict, which could not be revoked. The irrevocable nature of the Persian laws is mentioned in the book of Esther as well. The king was distressed over the bind he had put himself in. He tried to find a way out, but could find none. And so I want to... got a little bit of time left. Okay, 16 through 18. Then the king commanded, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the pit of lions. The king answered and said to Daniel, May the God whom you serve constantly deliver you. Now, I've got a correction to make on my own translation, but let me get back to that. A stone was brought and placed upon the mouth of the pit, And the king sealed it with his signet ring and with the signet ring of his nobles, that nothing might change concerning Daniel. He double sealed it, put a stone on the mouth of the pit, and then sealed it. We're not told how. Maybe it was wax seal, I don't know, but it was something that the signet ring could stamp with the king's stamp and the stamp of the nobles. There's no way that anyone could alter that. In an interesting twist from what Nebuchadnezzar had said to the three young men, what God is able to deliver you from my hands? Well, he found out what God. Darius expresses, in effect, confidence in the God of Daniel that he was able to deliver Daniel from the lions. And in fact, your English texts, I think, pretty uniformly say, may the God whom you serve deliver you. But that's called a jussive form. Let or may something happen, a third person imperative. That is really not the case here. It is the God whom you serve will deliver you, expressing confidence in the God of Daniel. The point of the double sealing is no deliverance is possible unless the Lord gives it. Okay, well, maybe I can read one more section. I've got something important to say. The king who had been greatly distressed, I need to read the translation, don't I? 19-24. Then at dawn, at daylight, the king arose and went to the pit of lions in haste. When he approached the pit of lions, he cried out to Daniel with a distressed voice. The king answered and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God, whom you serve constantly, able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions, and they did not destroy me because I was found to be innocent before him, and also because I have done no harm to you. Then the king was greatly pleased over him and commanded to take Daniel up from the pit, and no harm was found on him at all, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and they brought these men who had made accusations of Daniel, and they cast them, their sons, their wives, into the pit of the lions. And they did not reach the floor of the pit before the lions overpowered them and crushed their bones. Okay, maybe a little bit of hyperbole there. How big is this pit? There's 120 satraps and 2 other premiers, right? Did they cast them, and their wives and children? So hard to say. The king is relieved that the God in whom he'd expressed confidence was able to deliver Daniel. Daniel's job was not to know that God was going to somehow intervene, and that's an important point. Deliverance is in God's hands alone. Daniel's job was to keep doing what he customarily did, to be faithful in all circumstances, pray and be faithful in his dealings where God had placed him in the kingdom. The consequences of faithful behavior were not in Daniel's hands. In this case, faithfulness led to a pit of lions and eventually to God's deliverance. But deliverance from trouble, whether trivial or catastrophic, is not automatic and is not guaranteed. It is entirely in God's hands and subject to his will alone. Many prayers, and I'll end with this, many prayers have been sent up for many people, especially in the last year or two. I'm tired of burying my friends. I'm so weary of burying my friends. And there are so many that have died in the last year. And a lot of faithful prayers have gone up for these. The Brentwood chorus, including me, went and we sang and prayed over Bill Jimpty this last week. And I hope Billy doesn't mind me bringing this up. We prayed over him. I prayed over him that God might give him peace. And I'm given to understand that shortly after that prayer, Bill passed. And maybe that's what Bill needed to hear then, was a word of that God granted him peace and a sense of God's presence. But deliverance from that is in God's hands alone. Daniel was not given to know whether the mouths of the lions would be stopped up or not. And it's neither in our hands whether God delivers from a particular annoyance or catastrophe or not. It's in his hands. But the reassurance is that whatever the calamity or catastrophe is, God has promised, if we cry out to him, to be with us in the pit. What other reassurance do we need? The one in whose hands is the breath of life is with us in the pit. That's what people on their deathbed need to hear. That's what people in the hospitals need to hear. That's what we need to hear when we've got knotty problems that we don't know how to loose. God alone it's subject to his will, and we invite him to be in the pit with us. And guess what? Daniel says God sent his angel, what? The extension of God's own presence to be there in the pit with him, and that's the promise he extends to us as well. Sorry to keep you a little late. Let me pray. Oh God, our Father, we pray and invoke your presence when we are in our own difficulties or problems. Those who are on their deathbed or those who suffer late at night alone. May they cry out to you as well. May they pray. May we pray as Daniel did. And may you come to be with us in the pit. And give us the assurance and the sense of your divine presence and the peace that can only come through you. Grant us your presence this day as we worship you in spirit and in truth. For this is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you. Yeah.
Heard some bad news this morning.
No.
James Tackett woke up, found Wally dead on the
Oh, no.